It was a quiet morning in Maplewood Estates, the kind of morning where the air carried the scent of freshly cut grass and the soft chirping of birds echoed between rows of identical beige houses. At the far end of Willow Lane, Eleanor Parker sat in her favorite rocking chair on the porch of her little home. At 72, Eleanor's days moved at a slower rhythm, but her spirit was far from dim. She wore her wide-brimmed straw hat and let the golden sunlight fall across her shoulders while her knitting needles clicked in steady harmony. Knitting had always been her sanctuary. Each loop of yarn was a memory, a stitch tied to her late husband who used to sit beside her, sipping coffee while she worked on scarves for the neighborhood children. That porch, with its faded white paint and flower boxes bursting with petunias, was her stage of peace. But peace in Maplewood Estates never lasted long. Eleanor had noticed them earlier that week, the black SUVs with tinted windows, slowly rolling past her house. She didn't think much of it until she spotted Mr. Randall, the HOA president, watching her from across the street. He stood there in his pressed suit, clipboard tucked under one arm, lips pursed as if Eleanor's needles were committing a crime. She gave him a small wave, but he didn't return it. Instead, he scribbled something down and walked away. By Friday, a letter appeared in her mailbox. The paper smelled faintly of printer ink, the HOA logo stamped boldly at the top like a seal of authority. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it. Dear Mrs. Parker, it has come to our attention that your outdoor activities, specifically knitting on your porch, have been deemed unsightly and disruptive to the uniform aesthetic of our community. Effective immediately, you are to cease such activities or face fines of $150 per occurrence. Eleanor laughed at first. Knitting? Unsightly? She read the letter twice to make sure her eyes weren't betraying her. But as she sat there in disbelief, anger began to creep into her chest. The HOA had fined people before, for mismatched curtains, for leaving trash cans out too long, for painting their front doors the wrong shade of blue. But this was personal. That evening, her neighbor, Sarah Jennings, a young mother of two, stopped by with a plate of chocolate chip cookies. She found Eleanor sitting silently, the letter in her lap. They can't be serious, Sarah said after reading it, her jaw tightening. You're just knitting. How is that hurting anyone? Eleanor smiled weakly. They think it looks untidy. I suppose my porch doesn't match their perfect picture. Sarah shook her head. You can't let them push you around. Everyone on this street knows you, Eleanor. You've been here longer than any of them. We'll stand with you. But Eleanor wasn't so sure. The HOA had power, and power had a way of silencing even the bravest voices. She remembered how they forced old Mr. Peterson to repaint his shed 3 times in one summer, or how they fined the Johnsons so much over lawn height that they eventually moved away. Still, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Eleanor felt something she hadn't felt in years, a spark. They could call her knitting unsightly, but to her it was art, history, love, and survival woven into every strand. She picked up her needles and yarn once more, rocking gently on her porch, as if daring the world to stop her. Somewhere deep inside, she knew this wasn't just about knitting anymore. It was about dignity, freedom, and the right to be herself. And if the HOA wanted a fight, they had just found their opponent. The weekend brought whispers. Neighbors leaned across fences, trading gossip in hushed voices. Word of Eleanor's knitting violation had spread like wildfire. Some laughed, thinking it was a ridiculous rumor. Others shook their heads, muttering about how the HOA had gone too far this time. Eleanor tried to ignore it all, but when she walked to the community mailbox on Saturday morning, she could feel the stares. Mrs. Cole from 3 houses down gave her a sympathetic nod, while Mr. Randall himself passed by without a word, his polished shoes clicking against the pavement. He didn't even look at her, but the smug lift of his chin told her he knew exactly what he'd done. By the time Eleanor returned to her porch, she found Sarah already waiting there, her children playing on the lawn. I've been thinking, Sarah said, you can't just let this slide. If you give in, what's next? They'll say kids can't ride bikes because it ruins the aesthetic. Or that I can't hang laundry to dry. We need to stand up. Eleanor sighed, setting her knitting needles in her lap. I'm 72, Sarah. I don't know if I have the strength to fight them. Sarah leaned forward, her eyes fierce. That's exactly why you have to. This isn't just about you, it's about all of us. If they win here, they'll think they can control every detail of our lives. That night, Eleanor barely slept. Memories of her husband filled her mind, his voice telling her, "Never let anyone take your peace away, Ellie. Never." She remembered the years of sacrifice they'd endured just to own this home. To be told that sitting on her own porch was forbidden, it felt like an insult to everything they had built together. On Sunday morning, Eleanor made her decision. She pulled out her old leather-bound journal, the one where she kept important notes and letters. She drafted her response to the HOA with careful precision. "To whom it may concern, I will not be ceasing my knitting on my porch. It is my home, my right, and my joy. If you intend to fine me, know that I am prepared to contest this in front of the board and in front of the community. Some battles are worth fighting. This is one of them. Sincerely, Eleanor Parker." When Sarah read the letter, she grinned. "That's the Eleanor I know. Let's see them try to silence you now." Eleanor felt her heart pounding as she slid the letter into the outgoing mail slot. There was no turning back. She had challenged the very people who prided themselves on their control. 2 days later, another letter arrived, this one more formal, heavier paper, gold trim along the top. It summoned her to appear at the next HOA board meeting. The words, "mandatory attendance," sent a chill through her veins. The night of the meeting came quickly. The community hall stood at the center of Maplewood Estates, its sterile white walls lined with folding chairs. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Eleanor entered, Sarah at her side. Residents filled the room, their whispers echoing off the walls. Some looked at Eleanor with admiration. Others avoided her gaze, afraid of being caught on the wrong side of the HOA. Mr. Randall sat at the front of the room behind a long table, flanked by other board members in dark suits. His smile was thin and sharp, like a blade. "Mrs. Parker," he said, his voice carrying through the hall, "we have serious matters to discuss regarding your activities." Eleanor straightened her back. Her knees trembled, but she wouldn't let them see it. She clutched her knitting needles in her bag like weapons waiting to be unsheathed. The air was thick with anticipation. This wasn't just a meeting. It was the beginning of a war. And Eleanor was ready to fight. The meeting room hummed with low voices, but the moment Mr. Randall tapped his gavel against the table, silence fell like a curtain. His sharp eyes scanned the crowd before fixing on Eleanor. "Mrs. Parker," he began, his tone dripping with authority, "you have been found in violation of Section 4, Article 12 of our community guidelines, conducting unsightly activities visible from the street. Do you deny knitting on your porch?" Gasps rippled through the audience. Some residents couldn't hide their smirks, knitting, treated like a crime. Eleanor held her ground, her voice calm but firm. "No, I don't deny it. I knit on my porch. It's peaceful, it's harmless, and it's mine to do. There is nothing unsightly about creating something with love." A murmur of approval swept the room. Sarah squeezed Eleanor's hand under the table. But Mr. Randall wasn't moved. He leaned forward, his lips curling into a smirk. "It may seem harmless to you, but we must maintain the uniform beauty of Maplewood Estates. Exceptions create chaos. One woman knitting leads to another hanging laundry, then someone else setting up garage workshops. Before long, this community becomes a circus." Eleanor's cheeks flushed. "With respect, Mr. Randall, beauty is not found in control. It's found in life. In children's laughter, in gardens, in neighbors supporting each other. And yes, even in knitting." The room erupted, some clapping, others shushing. The tension was crackling, electric. Randall slammed the gavel. "Order! Order! Mrs. Parker, you are hereby fined $150 per incident. Failure to comply will result in escalating penalties, including potential property liens." Eleanor's heart sank. Property liens. That was the HOA's most brutal weapon, the threat to strip away the very homes people had worked their lives for. She could feel fear in the crowd. Several residents lowered their eyes, not daring to side with her publicly. But just as Randall prepared to close the discussion, a voice rose from the back of the hall. "Enough!" All heads turned. It was Mr. Davidson, one of the oldest residents besides Eleanor. His cane thudded against the floor as he stood, his weathered face stern. "I've lived here 25 years. I've seen this board bully family after family. I've watched neighbors sell their homes just to escape your rules. And now you call knitting unsightly? This is madness." The room buzzed with energy again. A few residents clapped, louder this time. Another voice chimed in, "Mrs. Cole, he's right. Eleanor isn't hurting anyone. She's part of what makes this neighborhood feel alive." Randall's composure cracked. His jaw tightened, his gavel slammed harder. "This is not a debate. Mrs. Parker is in violation. This board will not tolerate disobedience." But the crowd no longer seemed convinced. Whispers turned into murmurs, murmurs into defiance. People who had been silent for years were now speaking up, emboldened by Eleanor's stand. Eleanor felt a surge of strength. For the first time, she realized she wasn't alone. This wasn't just her fight anymore, it was everyone's. She stood tall, her voice cutting through the noise. "You can fine me, you can threaten me, but you cannot silence me. I won't stop knitting. Not today, not ever. And if you think you can take my home away for it, then you'll have to answer to every person here." The room exploded with applause. Sarah's children clapped too, their little hands echoing hope through the hall. Randall looked rattled, but his eyes glinted with something dangerous, a promise that this battle was far from over. As Eleanor left the meeting that night, the cool air hit her face like a cleansing breeze. She clutched her knitting needles tighter. The HOA had drawn their line in the sand. Now it was war. The night after the HOA meeting, Eleanor sat on her porch again, needles clicking steadily under the porch light. The applause of her neighbors still echoed in her ears, but so did Randall's glare. She knew men like him, men who didn't lose easily. By morning, her fears proved right. A bright orange notice was taped to her front door in bold, block letters. Notice of violation, final warning. It accused her not only of knitting but also of disturbing community harmony by inciting disorder at the board meeting. The threat at the bottom was clear: if she didn't comply, the board would pursue legal remedies including but not limited to property seizure. Her hands shook as she read it. Legal remedies. Property seizure. The words were like venom. She thought of her late husband, the way he had saved every penny for this house. Could they really strip it away over something so small? Sarah stormed over when she saw the notice. "This is harassment. They're trying to scare you into silence." Eleanor's voice cracked. "They're not just scaring me, Sarah. They're threatening to take my home." Sarah placed a firm hand on her shoulder. "Then we fight harder. They can't just invent reasons to bully people. You stood up at that meeting and people listened. That means you have more power than you realize." But Randall wasn't finished. That afternoon, as Eleanor sat knitting, a black SUV slowed in front of her house. Randall rolled down his window, his smirk colder than ice. "You should have listened, Mrs. Parker," he said. "That meeting only made things worse for you. I don't like troublemakers." Eleanor's blood boiled. "Knitting doesn't make me a troublemaker. It makes me free." Randall's eyes narrowed. "We'll see how free you feel when the fines stack so high you can't pay your bills. People think they'll stand with you, but when money's on the line, loyalty vanishes. You'll be alone again." The SUV rolled away, leaving Eleanor shaken but not broken. She looked at the ball of yarn in her lap. Her husband had always told her, courage isn't the absence of fear, it's standing tall despite it. That evening, a knock rattled her door. It was Mr. Davidson, cane in hand, his face grave. "Eleanor, I overheard something at the market today. Randall's pushing the board to vote on a special motion, one that would allow them to escalate violations directly to county court. He's making this about more than knitting. He wants to make an example out of you." The word struck her like a hammer. An example. If Randall succeeded, it wouldn't just be her porch at risk, it would be every neighbor who ever dared to step out of line. For the first time, Eleanor felt her knitting needles grow heavy in her hands. This wasn't just a pastime anymore. It was her banner, her protest. The next morning, she did something bold. She set up a small table on her porch with extra yarn and needles. When Sarah came by, Eleanor pressed them into her hands. "Sit with me," she said. By noon, 3 more neighbors had joined. By sunset, nearly a dozen people sat on Eleanor's porch and lawn, knitting together in quiet defiance. Bright colors of yarn stretched across their laps like threads of rebellion. Randall drove by again that evening, his SUV slowing, his face twisting with rage at the sight of the porch turn protest. This time, he didn't stop. He just sped off into the night. But Eleanor knew this was only the beginning. Randall wouldn't tolerate open defiance. He would strike harder and soon. And when he did, the entire neighborhood would be forced to choose sides. The following week, the community hall was packed tighter than ever. Every folding chair was taken, and still people stood in the aisles and lined the walls. The knitting protest had spread like wildfire. What began as a few neighbors on Eleanor's porch had turned into a movement. Dozens of residents now sat outside their homes in the evenings, knitting scarves, hats, or anything they could manage. Some didn't even know how to knit. They came anyway, holding needles as a symbol of defiance. The HOA had never seen anything like it. Randall called the emergency board meeting with one purpose: to crush the uprising before it spread further. He sat at the head table, his tie perfectly knotted, his jaw clenched. "This gathering is out of control," he announced, banging the gavel. "Our community rules are being mocked, our authority undermined. We cannot allow chaos to reign." He motioned toward a stack of papers. "Tonight, I am proposing a special motion. If passed, it will give this board the power to bypass minor citations and file violations directly in county court. This will ensure swift and decisive action against those who refuse to comply. Specifically," he let his gaze linger on Eleanor, "those who incite rebellion." Gasps filled the room. Eleanor sat quietly in the front row, her knitting needles resting in her lap. Her hands trembled, but her heart burned. She could feel the eyes of her neighbors on her, waiting, hoping. Randall lifted his chin. "All in favor?" 2 board members raised their hands. Eleanor's stomach dropped. If the motion passed, she could be dragged into court, drowning in legal fees she couldn't possibly afford. But then, something unexpected happened. The 3rd board member, Mrs. Caldwell, an elderly woman who rarely spoke, slowly lowered her hand back into her lap. Her voice quivered, but it carried across the room. "No, I won't support this." Randall spun toward her, stunned. "Excuse me?" Mrs. Caldwell straightened her glasses. "I joined this board to help keep our community safe and fair, not to punish people for living their lives. Eleanor is our neighbor. She has harmed no one. I refuse to let this board weaponize its power to destroy her." A murmur of approval swelled through the hall. Mr. Davidson rose to his feet, slamming his cane against the floor. "Hear, hear." Others joined in. Sarah stood up, her children tugging at her sleeves. "We won't let you take Eleanor's home. This isn't just about knitting, it's about freedom. And if you push this motion through, you'll have to drag every one of us into court." The crowd erupted, cheers, clapping, voices chanting Eleanor's name. It was chaos, but it was a chaos Randall couldn't control. His face turned crimson as he slammed the gavel again and again. "Order! Order!" he shouted, but no one listened. Eleanor rose slowly, her voice carrying above the noise. "I never asked for a fight, but you brought one to my porch. You wanted to make an example of me. Well, look around, Randall. The example has been set, but not the one you wanted. We are not afraid anymore." The cheers thundered. People stomped their feet, their voices echoing through the walls of the sterile hall until it felt alive again. Randall's motion collapsed right there. Without Mrs. Caldwell's vote, it failed. And with the community united, his power suddenly looked fragile, brittle, and weak. But Eleanor knew Randall wasn't finished. She saw it in his eyes, a storm brewing, darker than ever. He had been humiliated, and men like him never surrendered gracefully. This battle wasn't over. It was only reaching its peak. The night after the failed motion, Maplewood Estates felt different. Neighbors waved to one another with newfound boldness. Knitting circles sprouted on porches and driveways, laughter and chatter echoing down the manicured streets. For the first time in years, People felt united, not ruled. But Eleanor couldn't relax. She knew Randall's pride had been wounded, and pride was dangerous when mixed with power. Her suspicion proved right the next morning. She awoke to shouting outside. When she stepped onto her porch, she froze. A tow truck was parked in front of her home, chains rattling, while 2 HOA officers in black uniforms marched toward her with clipboards. "We're here to enforce a board directive," one officer declared coldly. "This property is under immediate lien action for unpaid fines." Eleanor's heart dropped. "That's impossible. I paid my dues. I owe nothing." Randall appeared from behind the SUV, smug as ever. "You owe for every day you refuse to comply. And as of this morning, your total exceeds $3,000. This home will be seized if you don't vacate." Gasps erupted from the gathering crowd. Neighbors rushed from their houses, forming a circle around Eleanor's porch. Sarah's face burned red with fury. "You can't do this. That motion failed. You have no right." Randall sneered. "The board doesn't need your approval. This is lawful enforcement." Eleanor's hands trembled, but she refused to step back. Instead, she lifted her knitting needles high, her voice shaking yet fierce. "This house is my home. You will not take it from me, not today, not ever." The crowd surged. Mr. Davidson planted himself in front of the tow truck, slamming his cane against the pavement. Mrs. Cole linked arms with Sarah. One by one, neighbors closed ranks, forming a wall of bodies between the officers and Eleanor's home. Randall's composure cracked. "Step aside," he barked. "All of you." But no one moved. Someone shouted, "We stand with Eleanor." Another voice followed, then another, until the chant rose in unison, "We stand with Eleanor. We stand with Eleanor." The officers hesitated. Their orders were clear, but the sight of dozens of defiant neighbors made them falter. Randall's face twisted with rage as he realized his grip had slipped entirely. His threats, his rules, his power, they meant nothing without obedience. Finally, the tow truck driver shook his head and shut off the engine. "Not worth it," he muttered. "I'm not dragging an old woman's house into court for knitting." He drove off, leaving Randall seething in the street. Defeated, Randall tried to bluster. "This isn't over," he shouted, but the words rang hollow. The crowd booed, voices rising louder than his gavel ever had. He turned, his suit rumpled, and stormed back into his SUV. For the first time, he looked small. Eleanor sank into her rocking chair, tears brimming in her eyes. Not from fear, this time, from relief. She glanced at her neighbors, their faces glowing with pride and solidarity. She lifted her needles once more, the yarn sliding between her fingers like victory itself. "This isn't about knitting," she said softly, but everyone heard. "It's about living free. And together, we just proved no board can take that away." Cheers erupted, the street alive with laughter, applause, and even the click of borrowed knitting needles. Maplewood Estates had changed forever. And Eleanor Parker, the woman once told she was unsightly, had become the heartbeat of a community that finally remembered how to stand tall.